I'm Diane Sheehan. I am a three-term alderman from Nashua. I've run 3 times and won 3 times, as I like to put it. We have about a third of the population of District 5 in Nashua, and I have always been on committees that reflect some of what the Executive Council does. The consistent committees I've been on are Human Affairs and Infrastructure, and I actually vice chair both of those at this point. I'm also on the National Regional Planning Commission, and I've pretty much served on every board in the city except for personnel, every committee in the city. I am also a mom of 2 children that are 10 and 11, 2 boys. I was showing her on the way out here today, going by like Crotchet Mountain and talking about the fact that that's where they ski, so they're learning how. They keep me very interested in the education that we have here because I see it on a daily basis, so I'm very much tied into the importance of that. I am also the founder of the local Nashua Free Cycle Group, which is an online recycling group of over 6,000 people in Nashua. I've been involved in my community, and that is what brought me to public service. So started going to City Hall and seeing what was going on as we're trying to champion issues through and get them approved. It occurred to me that I could do this, and it would be a lot easier to try to convince 14 peers than 15 people. So I had run for office, and I was elected. We have about 90,000 people, give or take, in Nashua, so it's about a third of the district, and we have a lot of issues that started looking bigger than Nashua if we wanted to solve them. So I got involved with the National Regional Planning Commission because one of our big issues is east-west traffic. As you and Keene are very aware, it's why you have your own economy over here, because it's just kind of tied off from everything else. So, you know, there's issues with rivers and bridges and trying to get across, which is part of why it's a big issue in Nashua, as well as what's of interest to most of our community on the east side of District 5 is rail, commuter rail, being a very important thing to look at. We have reports from the National Regional Planning Commission that show that 85% of our jobs for that area are within a quarter of a mile of either Route 3 or Route 101A. So if people can't get in and out of that area in an efficient way, we're not going to be able to bring businesses in, and that's really what it's about. When you bring in good businesses that have livable wages, it lifts the economy. So if we want to grow the economy, this is the biggest thing we have to look at. So that's how I truly became aware of the role of Executive Council and the impact that they have on our state when my opponent voted no on the rail study and also wouldn't take our phone calls from the city in an official capacity. And that was the part that I really was concerned with when Deb Pignatelli said she wasn't going to run again. Because as an alderman, we don't always agree with each other, but we always have conversations, we always reconnect after meetings, we make sure that there's still a relationship and you can still talk to people. And the same thing happens with constituents. Whether or not they agree with me or not, I'm still going to have a conversation with them. So it's just a business practice that you engage in conversations, and that's a critical part of Executive Council, because we are there to help people navigate the state and what you need to go through in order to, you know, just exist, to have a business, to, for whatever reason. So that was a big issue for me, because we are looking at how do we take our state to the next level. We have the economic engine in District 5. We have most of the money that's provided to the state. Nashua is the single largest tax provider to the state, revenue provider. If we can't leverage to make sure that we're doing our best, it puts a lot on others as well. So, you know, as Nashua goes, the rest is going to go. And so that was my initial coming into this. As I spend more time on the campaign trail, I become more aware of other issues. Managed care, the phase 2 that was just delayed was a big concern. You know, that's something I spent time trying to get up to speed on this summer, so that should I have the opportunity to be doing this next year, it wouldn't be like drinking from a fire hose with such an important issue. There's some very large issues that will be facing the Executive Council in the next term. Taking action on rail is one thing. If we have the legislature, the Senate, and the governor all agree to do it, but the first time it's time to write a check, someone can just say no based on ideology. That isn't what I think the Executive Council is set up to do. So it should be, is this a good contract, is this not a good contract, and we should be looking at things individually. The other really large item will be the Medicaid extension for the expansion, and again, that's something that's going to be acted on that really benefits a lot of people. It's not that less people are going to get sick. The same number of people get sick. It's whether or not they're getting primary care or if they're getting care delivered in a way that's appropriate and effective and efficient versus going to urgent care and emergency care, which costs us a lot more money in the long run and is spread over private insurers rather than, it's absorbed. So doing it in a better fashion gives us better outcomes, and it costs less in the long run.
I think we're going to talk about the commuter rail a little bit later, but since you brought it up and
Sure.
focused on that a little bit, your support of it is well known.
Yes.
But do you imagine, as executive counselor, having an advocacy role for support of a system in southern New Hampshire, or is it more a matter of dealing with issues related to it that come to the executive council's desk?
I think that it's a combination of both. I wouldn't say advocacy so much as facilitator. I think the role is to make sure that different people are brought together that need to be, and I think that's something that happens. In my role as alderman, I don't do a lot of the things that get done, but what I do is put people together who can make things work out better. And the only way you know how to do that is by constituent service and spending time understanding an issue and getting to know the people who are the real stakeholders, so I think that's important. And then, yes, the contracts that come in need to make sense, and they need to be something that's feasible. But I think the early indicators show that it's going to be very feasible.
Just in the past couple of weeks, the council decided to change the standard for the contracts that it has to approve from contracts at $10,000 up to $25,000. Is this something that you're in favor of? Is it something that you would support, or would you favor looking closer at the smaller contracts as well?
There's quite a few things to consider there. First is it's 0.2% of the budget amount, but it takes 25% of the council's time. It's not the council's time I'm concerned with, it's the man hours of the staff that need to support it. What has been suggested is a way that the most important thing retains transparency. The council has not voted no on any of these contracts in anybody's memory. So it's essentially spending a lot of time on employees on things that are being approved anyway. So it allows time for employees to do the jobs that they're supposed to be doing rather than pushing paper and showing up to a meeting to give a presentation on something that's really 0.2% of the budget. I know that if you are trying to get your license cleared for a new job, there's so much cutbacks in Concord that it takes weeks to get your license clearance. Is a company going to wait for somebody from New Hampshire for that clearance if they need somebody, or are they going to go to the Massachusetts person who can start the next day because it's an instant check? We need to have our employees doing what they're paid to do in those jobs, and that efficiency and improving the service rather than having some sort of dog and pony show that's going to get approved anyway. Printing a lot of paper, and they're spending a lot of time when it's not really returning an investment. So I do support it.
You also touched on infrastructure.
Yes.
And the projects that are on the Department of Transportation's 10-year highway list,
Yes.
More often than not, or invariably get moved out 10, 15, maybe more years.
Right.
So, can you maybe just talk a little bit about what the state needs to be doing to assure that its infrastructure doesn't become dangerously outdated or behind?
Yes, I think the gas tax was a good first step. There needs to be stability. And what we've had is, this is what we're going to do, and everybody agrees. Whew, here's your funding, it's cut, it's gone. And then, okay, so this is what we're gonna do. Okay, now you have a lot more funding, so we're jumping back to what the original plan was. And it really needs to have some long-term planning and some stability. And I think the gas tax changing the funding source and having it be more consistent is important, because we've seen the 101A plan get changed over and over again. We're trying to do some improvements for getting out west faster because everyone's cutting through Nashua to get where they need to go. I have gone to all the 10-year planning meetings in Nashua since I've been an alderman, and I've seen all the different changes, and I've been going to the NRPC meetings, so I see the drastic difference from budget year to budget year and what happens. And it's not good for bringing businesses here. They want to know that their roads are going to be complete, that the bridges aren't going to fall down, and if we're not showing that we're making these investments, why does a company want to come here and invest as well? Infrastructure and energy are the two things that really need to be addressed in order to fix our economic opportunity to be the best that it can be.
How would you make decisions if you're elected on the appointments of judges and notaries and commission members that you don't necessarily, that you don't know personally, or that you don't know their background?
In my professional career, before I was staying home with my kids, I was an indirect distribution manager who had managers working for her, and we were trained by Northwestern University and Arthur Anderson on behavioral interviewing, so that you are able to make sure that someone isn't just a resume that doesn't actually have something that's substantial behind it. I would make sure that they are respected well by their peers, do some background look to make sure that somebody is also demonstrated that they believe in the mission of the agency that they're going to be working for or with.
So how would you do that in terms of the judges coming up, or somebody for being appointed to a state commission? How do you make sure that the resume fits? Is that something that staff does, or?
No, you need to do your own homework, and that's something that I'm known for doing as an alderman. And there's ways to reach out to other people that are peers to find out what sort of, are they respected by their peers? What sort of issues have there been? Without going into the level of training, but there's things that I would apply a business standard. So what worked in business for hiring managers or directors would still apply in terms of making sure that they have skills that actually match. If they managed the same number of people, if they looked at budgets of this size, if they had outcomes that are good, if they demonstrated that they work well with others or support the mission. So you find out by talking to other people that have worked with them. I mean, there's background that you do, it's essentially a business that would be reference checking and just making sure that things match what the person is telling you.
In the context of a judicial appointment, is there an assessment of ideology that's appropriate?
I don't believe there is. I think that having somebody that their decisions stand up well is where you look. I don't think it's appropriate, and I know my opponent has used denying gun rights to domestic violence. People that have been convicted of domestic violence but have had it sealed or what have you, use that as a reason to decline a judge. I don't believe that that's appropriate, and I would not use that sort of litmus guide as a way to make a judicial appointment. I don't think that's appropriate.
So, if you're elected to the council, then you represent specific communities, the voters in those communities. But you're also charged with doing what's best for the state. And there may be instances where what's best for the state doesn't necessarily reflect what the people in your voting base would want.
Right.
For example, you talked about the rail project. So supposedly, or suppose everybody all along your strip wants an east-west commuter rail, or even the commuter rail up from Massachusetts.
Right.
But you look at it and you look at it and say, well, geez, from a statewide perspective, this just isn't justified given the cost. So then how do you balance those issues if people that are going to actually vote for you may not be happy with what you think is best for the state?
That happens. That happens, as an alderman. There's always going to be somebody that is on one side or the other. Otherwise, you wouldn't need an executive council, or you wouldn't need anybody who has to take a vote. So that could potentially happen. What it means is you need to be engaging people along the process, not waiting till it's a yes or no, so that people have a good concept of why something is appropriate or inappropriate, and be able to explain why you made the decision that you made. But you need to have the ability to speak to it and understand it well, and be proactive about reaching out to people so they understand where your position is, and take that phone call and show up at that meeting, and don't wait for it to hit the newspaper for that to be when you do it.
So would you anticipate that you would feel more beholden to the communities you represent, or more, this is what I feel I need to do because statewide it's a better...
It's very similar to at the city. Sometimes you have to make the decision about what's best for the whole that isn't going to be popular in a particular area. In Nashua, an example was we bought the water company, and there was a small parcel of land that was the only non-developed land. It was in my ward, and ultimately it wasn't a part of the watershed, and it would have cost us $5 million to buy back, just a few acres is what it came down to, that wasn't part of the watershed. And some of the people in my ward were not happy that I voted against purchasing it, because they enjoyed having that quiet piece of woods, but it was not what was in the best interest for the company or the city. So, it is something that I've had to do before, but again, it's how you handle that. I've had a history of explaining why, engaging, having community meetings. My opponent just doesn't take our phone calls when stuff like that happens. He voted against rail, wouldn't take our phone calls, wouldn't take the mayor's calls. We had to send the telegraph to his doorstep to get him to come to a meeting. It's just a contrast of our two styles. It's going to happen. I hope it's not rail, that's what it happens over, but it does happen, and it's always controversial, and it's how you handle it, I think, that makes the difference.
Do you plan on continuing your work as an alderwoman?
Absolutely. I think it's a benefit to both roles to understand when someone says, we cut the budget and we balanced the budget, and to be able to say, well, the budget's always balanced. Yeah. That's the law. Yeah. But your cuts meant that Nashua, for example, had $27 million that they had to make up in that 2-year period where they cut the budget. Taking it from one pocket instead of the other isn't a cut to the person who's actually paying the bill. It cut our effectiveness, it cut our service efficiencies. We had to cobble together a CHINS program in Nashua. We have the children's home there. We have a huge community that really was using those programs for at-risk people, and now we're losing the at-risk. We're waiting till it became a judicial matter. These are not things that saved us any money. The city of Concord, it cost them $3 million. Depending on the size of your community, those cuts were shifted to the local property taxes. And then they say, our property taxes are out of control. It's because it was cut. There's ways of understanding what an impact is when you are the person who's then working on the budget in that city or town. So I think it is very useful to have that perspective.
If an issue came before the executive council that affected Nashua directly, would you abstain from that, or how would you handle those two?
There would be no reason to abstain for it. I'm there to represent Nashua, so I'm not benefiting personally. We have a form that we fill out that if there is any conflict of interest, that we are able to recuse ourselves. My husband's not, an attorney or any of the things that tend to be the most often spousal recusals. This is all I do for a living, so I'm lucky to have a very accommodating husband who enjoys seeing the improvements that this kind of civic engagement has brought to our neighborhood. So, that is where is a personal benefit. No, I'm there to help make District 5 better, so I should be that's an interest, it's not a conflict of interest. So that's how I see it.
Well, we could jump off of that, I suppose, because you talked about how you imagine the commuter rail lending itself to a stronger economy for the state. I wonder if perhaps you could talk about some other ways in which you imagine over the next 2 years the Executive Council is going to have to act or look at ways to continue to do those important tasks, which is create jobs and grow the economy and keep that trend line working in the direction it needs to work.
I think that decisions and contracts need to be looked at in terms of what return on investment will they have. Is it something that's an investment that can bring opportunity here, or are we looking at just a way to say no and shut things down? I think we need to carefully balance, is this going to bring us something more, or is this just protecting a dinosaur that isn't necessarily serving its purpose anymore? And when you look at business, if I invest $10 and I get 150 back, that's a good reason to spend money. If it is protecting our most at-risk people and saving us cost of services, that's an important thing to be looking at. There are contracts that will come before us that will be easy to see if that's something that happens or not. We're not the policy branch of the government, so it is strictly you're looking at the contract and saying, is this a good contract? Is this not a good contract? A casino is a good example of something like that. Is it something that is going to have a good return on investment? Or, has everybody voted on it? It looks great, it comes to us, but the level of investment that goes back to the state is not adequate to cover what our negative costs are that we're going to need to cover. Those are the sorts of things that we'd be looking at. Would that bring a lot of jobs? Yes. Would it bring some issues with it? Yes. So there needs to be a strong contract that shows that we're going to be able to cover our costs and have additional revenue. So those are the sorts of things, and it's using a business model to try to say, is this a good thing or not a good thing?
The Executive Council is seen by a lot of people as being nonpartisan, but it is an elected position. People run through their parties, and the parties have historically exerted pressures on executive councilors for, to go one way or another, to stop an issue, to forward an issue. Do you think that there is a place for ideology on the council in terms of, if you look at a particular project or contract or issue that's before you as a counselor, and say, well, I can see where this doesn't make economic sense based on this, but the overarching issue is so important, I'm going to vote this way. Maybe an example would be Medicaid expansion. If you get the actual contract and you look at it and say, wow, boy, this isn't great, but we really need to do this. Does that influence how you vote in terms of looking at it from a larger perspective?
Well, it would be great if we could set the Medicaid rates that we're gonna get and that providers are going to get, but we don't. So that's, it's kind of difficult. What does happen if we don't provide services is it rolls back to the city or the town because they're the last line of defense. So somebody's going to pay it. And maybe this is a bad example to use, I'm not sure. As a rule, we have an obligation to society to provide a safety net. So some of those things are never going to be free. You know, there's going to be costs associated with it. We don't always like what the costs are, but there are some things that have to be done. People need to be in a nursing home if they need to be in a nursing home. There are programs that, you know, we just have to have, or we're going to have a bigger issue. We had cut Health and Human Services, and that had a huge impact on the city of Nashua. We had the intervention programs cut, and then we had a huge surge in addiction, and we had to hire more police. We knew that was going to happen. We knew it was going to take a particular amount of time. They were going to be at a cost, so some things are going to be unpopular. You know, my city position is nonpartisan, so that we focus on the business of the city and not the party politics, and I think that that works really well in decision making. So I can't see where that would be a big issue for me, other than I do believe that, you know, you don't put a person out on the street because of lack of a program that we're supposed to have. You know, cutting chins was a huge problem. It didn't make the problems go away. It made our effective ways of dealing with it go away, and we spent a lot more money to get about half the results. So I know you're trying to ask me a specific question.
Well, yeah, I guess it's not so much about Medicaid expansion specifically. That was just an example. I mean,
Planned Parenthood, are you going?
It could be Planned Parenthood. It could be.
Is that where you're going without
It could be
saying
expanded. No, not
Okay.
necessarily. No, I'm not trying to get at Planned Parenthood.
Okay.
But that would be an example of what looked to be a very partisan issue when
Okay.
it came before the council, and so the council
It was
voted one
made-
way.
Right, it was made to be partisan,
And-
and that bothered me.
Okay.
That bothered me a lot because it's science. You know, this is about delivering health care to people who can't get it. My mother died 14 years ago from breast cancer that was discovered at stage 4. I know how important early intervention is, and this is the primary source of early screenings for many women all over our state, not necessarily in District 5. We're very lucky in that way that we have a lot more health care at, you know, every mile than they do in North Country. This is something that was politicized that shouldn't have been. It's about health care and women's access to things that really, you know, the sooner you catch it, the better your survivability, the better you are able to handle, you know, I was BRCA tested because of my mother dying so young from it. My grandmother had had it, and, you know, I had some very serious decisions to make before the results even came back. And I'm lucky because I have health insurance, but for many women, this is their primary care providers. And somebody's making an ideological decision or ruling based on something that has nothing to do with the services they were providing. And I don't agree with doing that. It's, you know, it's something that you're looking at the contract in front of you, and that's how that decision should have been made.